Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Timothy Harfield, Senior Product Marketing Manager with Blackboard Analytics. It's my great pleasure today to be joined by Paul O'Brien, who is Vice President for Information Technology and CIO at Indian River State College. Thank you for joining me today, Paul.
Oh, happy to be here.
Now, your role, Paul, at Indian River State College and its relationship to student success efforts is a little bit unique. On some campuses like yours, the CIO is essentially involved in conversations about student success, but this is not always the case. Can you speak to why your role as formally involved in your student success efforts has been, instrumental to the success of your efforts?
I think probably, the first thing I would say is my journey probably to the CIO was a little different than most, in that I actually started out as faculty and in computer science and mathematics, and I think maybe bringing that instructional background, I kind of always kept my foot, so to speak, in what was happening instructionally at the college. And back in 2001, when we started really looking at really a cultural initiative, which really was at the time led by our president, and was kind of really focused on driving student success, looking at completion, and frankly we were doing this a little bit before this was really the in vogue thing to do, right? So we probably over the last, from 2001 to 2007-8, really made the switch to thinking more of an output model than an input model, right? So switching from that traditional FTE, getting students in seats, getting enrollment up, to really thinking about retaining students and getting them graduated, walking across the stage, so to speak. And when you make that switch, I think one of the key things is really getting as much insight as you can into, frankly, the leaks in the pipeline, where you're losing students, what's going wrong, what's going right, what's working, and really using the data. And frankly, to me, it's what today the data has come such a long way with products like Analytics for Learn, and now, of course, we're into Blackboard Predict. But I think to answer your question, I've just always been interested in that area. And at my own institution, I've just, I'm there now over 25 years, so I've just always played that role.
Now, the virtual campus has not always been there, right? Can you briefly describe the factors that led to the creation of the virtual campus at Indian River State College, and also to your reasons for investing in analytics to support your student success efforts in that space?
Yeah, so probably around 2010-11, we started taking a look at the uptick in enrollments in virtual, and as that number started to swell towards 10% of our total enrollment, we started really looking at this as having a major impact on our overall goal to get more students retained and graduated. And frankly, we saw that the courses themselves, the student success rates in those courses, were frankly pretty much lagging behind their peer face-to-face offerings, probably in the realm of about 20 to 25 percentage points on average. Some of them, now of course we all know averages hide some of your real problems, so some of those, when I started taking a look at them, we could see maybe lags of 40, 50%, right? Very, very poor success rates. And so we put a work group together at the college, which was kind of part of our culture at the time, is we kind of operationalize things we want to look at through forming these time-limited work groups. And this work group in particular was made up of faculty from various disciplines, many of whom were involved in teaching some of these online classes, some weren't, administrators and some staff. And they came back with a couple of recommendations. They went and did research, and they came back with, number one, that we should organize this around the concept of a virtual college, virtual campus. It ended up becoming a virtual campus. But at that time, the recommendations came with it. We should become much more focused on formal instructional design, kind of methodology to developing these courses. With that came the recommendation that we needed to hire an instructional design staff. Another recommendation that came from that was that we should switch our focus from simply putting courses online to putting entire degree programs online. And out of that also came the idea of a master course, much like we somewhat recognized that from a monetary standpoint, we could do a course really, really well, right? But if you had lots of variations, I'll pick something simple like English 101, we could do one version of English 101 really well, or we could do 15 versions of it not so well. So that was kind of the model that came out. And then, of course, with that, we wanted to be able to monitor how well we were doing. And so at that point, we made the investment in Analytics for Learn as that rolled out in order to start monitoring, right, success rates in particular in these courses. And more importantly, what Analytics for Learn gave us was an unbelievable amount of insight into what was happening in the course. Right, so we could see, for example, student and faculty participation in things like discussion posts. We could see how quickly faculty were responding to emails that the students were asking questions about. So we had a lot of insight into what was happening in the course, and from that insight we were able to drive policy and procedure to kind of tighten things up. And the thing I'm most proud of with that story is, since we put the virtual campus in place, our success rate went from, when we first year we launched, was at 70.1%. And I remember these figures very well. And right up now, we're batting right up against an 80% success rate in online. And I credit the work with our team, our instructional designers, and our director of that area, that they did a great job in bringing that home for us.
Yeah, it really is a success story. Now, you mentioned your instructional design staff, investments in instructional design. I think it's absolutely fascinating that IRSC has a trained instructional designer actually as Dean of the virtual campus. Now, Kendall St. Hilaire, who's just over here, by the way, her expertise in this area is apparent in the high-impact strategies like master courses, which you mentioned, in faculty development. How has having an instructional designer as Dean shaped your use of analytics for learn in support of student success efforts at IRSC?
Well, I think I always am a believer in that there's certain areas of any institution that really require foundational knowledge in order to really execute that position well. And a simple example would be, we would never think of putting probably a non-accountant into our CFO position, right, or a non-finance person. You wouldn't, although it does happen in some institutions, whereby maybe a non-technology person ends up in charge of a technology-related area. But at my core, I believe that somebody with an inside knowledge of the subject that we're asking them to run, right, is going to do a much better job. And frankly, as we bring faculty along in this conversation, I wanted somebody, because instructional design today is an academic discipline at the university level. There's master's and doctoral degrees. One of the things we did is we made sure that whole team had at least a master's degree in instructional design, right, when we put them on board, so that they would not be, I didn't want to get into this debate whereby, the old model, which essentially was a course development model, faculty hand a bunch of material to some course developer and say, put that up for me, right? Rather, I wanted to have those meaningful conversations about instructional design and the subject matter expertise, particularly where we were focused was making sure there was a strong alignment between learning outcomes for the course, the content, and the assessment measures. And so I felt like and Kendall excelled in that role. And of course, when we had the opening for the director and she applied for it, I could see clearly that putting somebody with that background into that role was going to make a lot of sense, and in fact it really has.
Now, another important student success strategy that you've employed has been in the area of proactive advising. You're currently in the process of piloting Blackboard Predict. How do you view predictive analytics as a complement to your existing student success strategies?
I think prediction is going to be the future of analytics, and maybe, well, certainly in the near future. Beyond that, I'm hoping for prescriptive solutions, right? So that the solutions themselves will inform people, our counselors and our faculty, maybe of the best course of action. But predictive right now today, let's take a look at A4L, which has been great for us. But A4L, we mandate that all faculty use the Blackboard Grade Center. So, and we're mining those grades at week 4, week 8, week 12, week 16. But really the critical week for us is midterm, is week 8. And at that point in time, right, you've really got 8 weeks left now. You're in the latter part of the semester to try and make up the difference. I think in conversations with our faculty, it makes a lot of sense. And there's where I'm hoping Predict and the whole area of machine learning will really pay dividends for us. If I can move that up, right, so that at week 0, I've got a pretty good indicator of somebody's likelihood of success. At week 1, it's better. Now, at that point, it's probably relying much more heavily on SIS data, right? And then as the term goes on, of course, the LMS data is coming more into play. But in either case, if we can make an intervention, make help available to the students, right, at a much earlier point in the semester, I think we can save a lot more of them, right? And so prediction is going to open up the possibility on the faculty side with moving that bar back maybe to weeks 2 and 3 where we can intervene and take action. But for our counselors, at week 0 perhaps, right, if we knew, for example, at 70% likelihood of a student getting an ABC in this course, the question is going to be, what does a counselor do with that information? That's what I'm kind of excited to find out. But I think this is an exciting field. I think, I just think that there's real hope here, both on the faculty side and the advisor side, of really bringing our interventions to bear. And let me give you the other side of that coin. It turns out we've limited resources at all our public institutions, and Indian River certainly is no exception. But I think if I can now predict and narrow my population down so that I'm not trying to throw the same solution at everybody, but now I know that maybe 80% of my problems are going to be in this smaller population of 3,000 or 4,000 rather than 30,000. Now I can be much more targeted, and I can bring meaningful interventions to bear, while at the same time saving the expense of trying to help everybody, right? And I think, and yeah, it's not going to be an exact science. Some students who we're going to target for interventions probably would have successfully completed the course, and others that we missed. But I still think if the model starts to come out in the 70s and the 80s, I think that the cost savings on both sides and the value to the students, I think, is going to be phenomenal.
Any thoughts on the future of cognitive computing and how the role that would play in higher education?
In very simple terms, I think it's going to come down to the interventions that ultimately faculty and advisors come up with, Ryan. And how do I store those in a way that from an artificial intelligence point of view, a system could learn from the interventions that are working, right, in a particular case, right, and be able then to effectively, I could build some kind of a system where those interventions, along with the prediction, are actually suggested to the faculty member or suggested to the counselor. And I think that's just super exciting, because I think also, if you think about it, it also shifts the faculty's work and the advisor's work to maybe much more what they were trained to do, right? And that is that bringing this kind of intervention help to the students, right? Of getting them across the finish line, of providing the scaffolding or whatever it is they're going to need to get them across the finish line. And our counselors perhaps and advisors, instead of simply maybe, I don't mean this tritely, but just shopping for courses and catalogs and the things that we have to do today to make all this thing work, right, can really get focused on meaningful advising interventions. Supported though by the technology, right? So now the technology becomes an enabler, right? Becomes, right, a leverage that we can now apply to maybe narrow in very quickly on a type of solution that we're going to apply to this particular student's problem.
So, as a sort of final question as we conclude, how do you view the relationship between higher education and technology vendors? What makes a good partnership, and what do you value the most when it comes to your partnership with Blackboard in particular?
Well, I think number one, for me, the culture at Indian River is we are very much about recognizing the need to accept change, and we're very, very aware of how quickly technology is changing the rest of the world, right? And in fact, in many ways, I think higher education is a little bit late to the game in some places, particularly, in the finance industry, for example, predictive has been around a long time. And I think for us, I'm looking for somebody that really wants to work with us, and I value Blackboard right now because, frankly, as we stand up something like Predict, frankly, we could never afford the data scientists that are backing that up. We could never afford to hire that caliber of person. Maybe we could hire one of them, right? We're not going to hire a team, right? And so I think that for me, with a lot of our vendors, we've been willing to step out, and especially because they're looking for test beds to test new products out. They're looking to fine-tune them, tweak them, right, and get working models. And I think, so I'm looking for those kind of companies that want that kind of partnership. And in return, we're willing to be the testing center. We're willing to be a place where these models can be developed. And we're learning a lot from, frankly, working through. Our people are learning a lot from working through these implementations. You're not going to get it right the first time, and you have to accept that, right? So our first pilots out of the box through Predict, they were good, but they're not really where we want to end up. So now we're back in. But in that spirit of making it better on both sides, we're working there and we're working through that. And I think that type of collaboration really makes a big difference between somebody that's a vendor and somebody that's a true partner with you. All right? Hence, I'm here today. All right?